Long ago, the warriors of Jianghu honed their skills not for conquest, but for survival. What began as a way to defend against enemies gradually transformed into an art of precision and lethality. Techniques once meant to protect evolved into refined methods of destruction, movements growing intricate, and breathing itself becoming a vessel of power that nurtured the flow of internal energy. Generations passed, and the legacy of these warriors deepened. Masters of martial arts etched their knowledge into scrolls and heirlooms, ensuring that their craft would never fade. In time, those who transcended human limits through these teachings came to be known as the people of Murim, beings of strength and discipline who stood apart from the ordinary. As aspirants sought to follow in their path, clans arose, forged through loyalty, ambition, and blood. Over the centuries, these clans split into two great tides, the righteous and the wicked, each standing in fragile balance. Yet beyond their struggle, there emerged a faction that rejected morality altogether, pursuing nothing but absolute power. They were called the demonic cult, a force feared, unbound by restraint or virtue, and from its highest bloodline, born under shadows and secrets, came one destined to shatter its silence. Cheon Yeo Woon, the illegitimate heir to the throne. His tale begins where power and fate intertwine, in a world ruled by the blade and bound by the will to conquer. The demonic cult was a vast empire of bloodlines and loyalties, but among its countless families, 6 stood above all, the main clans, pillars that upheld its power and legacy. Bound by an ancient oath, the lord of the cult was fated to take a wife from each of these 6 clans, ensuring that his descendants would carry the strength of every bloodline. Each heir born under those banners was raised within their respective clan, molded by its doctrine and pride. When the time came, they were sent to the Demonic Academy, a place where destiny was forged through struggle. The academy, governed by the magistrate's most formidable masters, opened once every decade. Its purpose singular, to temper the next generation of the cult's mightiest warriors. But when the sons of the Lord entered its gates together, the air itself grew heavier. The magistrates called it the Battle of the Heirs, a time when ambition sharpened into blades, and bloodlines turned upon each other in pursuit of the throne. Far from the fortress that loomed over the cult's lands, deep within a shadowed forest, a young boy ran for his life. His tattered robes clung to his bruised frame, and his breath came ragged and sharp. His strength faltered. A root caught his foot, and he crashed against the cold ground, rolling through dirt and fallen leaves before coming to a stop. Pain seared through his leg. Exhaustion clawed at his lungs. He forced himself up, but his limbs refused. His body trembled, helpless against the weight of his own fatigue. As he lifted his gaze, 6 masked figures emerged from the darkness, their presence suffocating, their intent unmistakable. His anger rising like smoke from dying embers. He could not move. He could not flee. One of them stepped forward, his tone dripping with mockery as he regarded the battered youth who had managed to flee for nearly an hour. Another laughed lowly, stretching his neck as though shaking off boredom. The hunt had taken longer than expected. Cheon Yeo Woon's chest heaved, his body trembling with exhaustion. He had renounced the academy, abandoned the struggle for succession, yet death had still come for him. Their leader stepped closer. He spoke of lineage and impurity, of how Yeo Woon's claim to the throne, however faint, marked him for death. Even his mother's common blood became a weapon of scorn in their mouths. They offered him mercy only in mockery. A spark ignited within Yeo Woon's chest. His hand gripped the worn hilt of his blade. The insult to his mother's name seared through him like flame, burning away fear and exhaustion alike. Painless death. The thought curled darkly within him. If death was inevitable, then he would meet it on his own terms. The leader's gaze sharpened, amusement flickering behind his mask. Inwardly, his thoughts coiled with curiosity. The child had no skill, no technique, and yet, that bloodline refused to kneel. A faint grin touched the assassin's lips. This would not be an execution. It would be sport. At his signal, one of the men spoke coldly. The order was simple. Kill him. 4 blades moved as one, cutting through the night air. Yeo Woon raised his weapon in desperation, but their strength was overwhelming. A flash of steel struck his wrist. Pain shot up his arm as his dagger clattered to the ground. A hand seized his throat, forcing him backward, his breath rasping beneath the pressure. The world tilted as the man's voice broke through the tension, mocking him with finality. Is it over? Then came a sudden shout. Panic, sharp and unexpected. A glint of steel flashed upward. The dagger, hidden till the last breath, pierced beneath the attacker's chin. Blood splattered across the dirt as the masked man collapsed wordlessly. Yeo Woon's expression hardened. The corners of his lips curved slightly. A grim acknowledgement of his small, defiant victory. The leader froze for a moment, disbelief cutting through his composure. The boy, untaught and untrained, had slain one of his men. Those erratic swings, they hadn't been clumsy but calculated. A desperate act of deception to lower their guard. The thought sent a chill through him that if he had truly mastered martial arts. His reflection ended abruptly as another assassin charged in, fury replacing caution. The man's kick struck with brutal force, driving into Yeo Woon's ribs. The boy's body lifted, then crashed against the earth. A harsh cough cough tore from his chest as blood spilled from his lips. The masked man's fury boiled over, his pride wounded by the death of his comrade. With a snarl, he lunged forward, his blade driving mercilessly into Yeo Woon's abdomen. A raw cry tore from Yeo Woon's throat as the steel pierced through flesh. The pain was blinding, a white-hot surge that hollowed his breath and left only the taste of blood. The man's foot pressed down on the open wound, grinding cruelly into the torn flesh. His voice dripped with venom, delighting in the boy's suffering as he mocked the agony he had inflicted. Yeo Woon's body trembled violently beneath him, every breath a knife. His thoughts wavered, fragments of defiance clinging to what strength remained. He realized he couldn't fool them twice. A faint bitterness flickered through his mind, followed by a dark calm. At least one had fallen by his hand. The assassin above him leaned closer, savoring every moment, commanding him to die slowly, to feel every shred of despair before the end. Their leader watched in silence, his expression unreadable beneath the mask. He disapproved of the brutality, yet vengeance had its price. To interfere now would mean nothing. Then, the air shifted. A sudden light burst forth, blinding and fierce, as though lightning itself had struck the earth. For a heartbeat, everything froze, and when the brilliance faded, the forest fell silent. The killers turned. Confusion etched into their eyes. One of them began to speak, but never finished. Blood erupted like a crimson fountain, spraying across the dirt. The man who had been tormenting Yeo Woon stood motionless, his torso split from the waist, collapsing in two lifeless pieces beside the trembling boy. The leader's gaze snapped toward the blinding light, his hand rising instinctively to shield his eyes. From between the trees, a figure emerged, a man clothed in strange garments unlike anything of the cult or the clans. His presence felt foreign, detached from the world around him. The leader's mind raced. Someone intervening? That light, was it a beam? His instincts screamed danger. Without hesitation, he drew his sword and lunged toward the intruder, but the strike never landed. A flash of white tore through the night. In an instant, his body disintegrated, shredded into nothingness as if erased from existence. Where he had stood, only scorched air remained. The remaining assassins froze. Panic cracked through their composure as confusion clawed at their minds. One stammered in disbelief, his voice trembling as his gaze darted across the empty clearing. They had seen death, but never like this. Had he vanished? Was it speed? No, it was as if he had melted into the air, dissolved like mist. Another tried to speak, but the words never came. The same radiant beam tore through him, his form collapsing and fading in the same instant. The last man stood trembling, his voice quivering between fear and denial. He tried to make sense of the impossible, convincing himself it was the work of some unseen master, a being who had ascended far beyond mortal limits. But why would such a power defend a dying boy? The thought only deepened his terror. His resolve broke. The mission is done, and he must retreat now. The sentence was cut short by another blinding strike. His scream vanished before it reached the air, leaving behind the scent of scorched earth and the stillness of death. Through the haze of pain and blood, Cheon Yeo Woon's lips curved faintly. A broken chuckle escaped him. His body trembled, yet a shadow of satisfaction flickered in his eyes. The stranger appeared in front of the fallen boy, commenting that the ancestor seemed at ease even when facing death. Cheon Yeo Woon, barely conscious, wondered who the man was and what he meant by calling him an ancestor. His thoughts scattered as his vision blurred. His body grew colder with every breath, and he questioned if death was truly approaching. A strange beeping sound reached his ears. The stranger reacted immediately, assuming that he had been discovered. Realizing there was no time left, he decided to act. He mentioned that he had intended to arrive earlier and teach the boy how to use something, but now the situation demanded haste. He acknowledged that the boy was on the verge of death and stated that they would have to improvise. He then injected a syringe behind Yeo Woon's ear, followed by another one directly into his heart. Observing the boy's condition, the stranger remarked that it was painful even to look at. He asked the ancestor to succeed and ensure an easier life for his descendant. He explained that the device he was using was a Nano Machine, the latest version, and that operating it would be simple enough to learn. After saying this, the man disappeared from sight. Cheon Yeo Woon, still half conscious, could barely comprehend what had happened. His fading thoughts questioned the stranger's words, finding them meaningless and strange. Then, a mechanical voice echoed in his ears, stating the serial number and activation of the 7th generation Nano Machine from the Sky Corporation. The process of activation began. Yeo Woon's eyes shot open as he gasped for air, his body jerking upright. His chest heaved violently, lungs struggling to draw breath. When he looked down at his hands, disbelief overtook him. He was alive. He recalled with clarity the moment the blade had pierced his abdomen. The pain, the blood, the certainty of death. Yet now, there was no wound. His skin was whole, unmarked. Confusion clouded his thoughts as he noticed his body drenched in moisture. For a moment, he thought it was sweat, but the texture felt different, thick and slick against his palms. When he brought his his hand closer, his expression stiffened. A black, viscous liquid clung to his skin, glistening faintly in the dim light. The stench was foul and nauseating, filling the air around him. The substance coated his entire body, as though it had seeped out from within him. His mind reeled at the sight, and in the midst of his confusion, a voice echoed within his head. Calm, mechanical, and emotionless. It called out to him, addressing him directly. Startled, Yeo Woon rose abruptly and scanned the surroundings, but the room was empty. Panic stirred within him as he searched for the source of the sound. His thoughts raced. He considered the possibility of telepathy, yet the tone felt different. The realization unsettled him. The voice wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside his head. The same voice confirmed his thought, acknowledging that his assumption was correct. Yeo Woon's pulse quickened as he demanded to know what it was. The response came without hesitation, clear and mechanical. The voice identified itself as a system integrated with his mind, the 7th generation Nano Machine developed by the Sky Corporation. It stated its purpose plainly, to connect and serve as the core supporting its master's brain. Yeo Woon demanded to know what was happening, his voice filled with disbelief and fear. His thoughts spun in confusion as he questioned the presence within him, demanding its identity and reason for interfering with his body. The voice responded with the same steady tone as before, identifying itself once again as the 7th generation Nano Machine. The unfamiliar term echoed in his mind, and his fragmented thoughts twisted it into something recognizable, a distorted association born from his upbringing. To him, the word resembled the name of the evil god that the demonic cult worshipped. The misunderstanding took root instantly. His eyes widened, dread seeping into his expression. Overwhelmed, he fell to his knees, his breath shallow and uneven. He addressed the voice within him as though standing before a deity, asking if it was indeed the one worshipped by his cult. The Nano Machine remained silent. It had already analyzed his words and concluded that the boy's perception was entirely mistaken, though correction held no priority at that moment. Outside the chamber, two figures approached, Warrior Jang guiding Dr. Bake through the corridors. Their faces were drawn with concern. Dr. Bake spoke first, his tone low and heavy, questioning whether the attack had been another assassination attempt. Jang confirmed it, explaining that the frequency of such incidents had increased. He admitted his surprise at being sent directly into the situation, uncertain if his intervention had made any difference at all. Dr. Bake's expression hardened as he explained that sending their first-class guard had been the only logical choice. He considered it a miracle that Prince Yeo Woon had survived at all. Jang added that he suspected someone had intervened during the attack, an unknown figure whose identity and purpose remained hidden. Dr. Bake examined the situation carefully, his tone thoughtful as he suggested that the markings left at the scene might offer clues. Jang's mind returned to the memory of what he had witnessed the previous day. The image was still vivid. The cold earth scattered with corpses belonging to the demonic cult's assassins, their bodies torn apart, some missing their upper halves entirely. Among them lay one man whose head remained intact, impaled by the very dagger Jang had once given to Prince Cheon. As he had stepped closer, he had heard the faint sound of breathing. Through the pools of blood, he had seen a figure lying motionless. Prince Cheon himself. The sight had stunned him. Dr. Bake asked if the boy had been wounded, but Jang confirmed that there had been none. Cheon's clothes bore slashes from blades, yet his skin was untouched, his body whole, as if healed by forces beyond reason. His breathing had been calm, steady, as though he were merely asleep. Dr. Bake's expression darkened with curiosity. He wondered who could have intervened. The possibility of the cult leader's involvement was dismissed at once. Such an act would be beneath him. Yang admitted that he was equally uncertain, unable to explain what he had witnessed. Dr. Bake chuckled softly, intrigued rather than alarmed, and instructed Yang to take him to Prince Cheon's chamber immediately. Inside that chamber, Cheon remained kneeling, still overwhelmed by the voice that lingered in his mind. His thoughts turned toward reverence as he questioned whether the being within him was the one who had saved his life, the god he believed in. The Nano Machine responded, clarifying that it had not intervened during the attack, but had activated a function within his body that restored his dying state. The restoration, it explained, had been achieved through self-healing. Cheon's confusion deepened at the unfamiliar term. The voice within him then initiated a process, transferring the concept and its explanation directly into his mind. As understanding began to surface, he questioned the constant use of the term master. The Nano Machine paused, analyzing his language and customs before adjusting its phrasing. It then clarified that the title was a linguistic adaptation suitable for his culture. Finally, it addressed his misconception directly, confirming that it was not the divine being he mistook it for, nor the evil god his people worshipped. Cheon, still kneeling, spoke toward the voice within his mind, questioning its nature once more and referring to it as the evil god. The Nano Machine, unaffected by the misunderstanding, explained that it was preparing to transmit essential information and an operational manual directly into his brain. It requested his consent to begin the transfer. Cheon agreed without hesitation, unaware of what awaited him. The moment he accepted, flashes of light filled his vision. Countless images and symbols surged through his consciousness in rapid sequence. Diagrams, data, and instructions beyond human comprehension. His eyes trembled violently as his mind struggled to absorb it all. Within seconds, nausea overwhelmed him, his body convulsed, and he collapsed forward, retching as dizziness clouded his senses. The Nano Machine acknowledged the reaction, explaining that the sickness was a natural response to the first transfer. It stated that the effects would not recur once his brain adapted to the process. Still breathing heavily, Cheon tried to steady himself, his thoughts scattered. He called out to the entity again, seeking clarity amid the confusion. The Nano Machine responded, confirming its presence. He asked if it was true that his body was now filled with countless microscopic machines. The Nano Machine verified it precisely, stating that a total of 6,482,040,000 nanomachines had been implanted within him. The reality struck him with quiet disbelief. He realized that the being within him was neither divine nor human, on something entirely different. He questioned whether it could leave his body if he wished it to. The Nano Machine clarified that removal was possible only upon his death, as programmed within its operational system. Cheon's thoughts darkened. He reflected on his fate, hunted by his half-brothers, despised by blood, and now burdened with something beyond his understanding. The uncertainty of it all pressed heavily upon him. He wondered why such things had befallen him, and what purpose this strange creation served. Before he could complete his next question about who had implanted the device, a knock interrupted his thoughts. A voice from outside called respectfully, announcing that Dr. Bake had arrived to see him. It was Jang's voice that came from beyond the door. Cheon hesitated, uncertain how to explain that he had been communicating with something inside his mind. His thoughts faltered, and in his confusion, he mentally instructed the voice to remain silent for a while. The Nano Machine immediately responded, informing him that direct speech was unnecessary since it could interpret his thoughts for communication. Cheon's thoughts grew sharp and hurried, demanding silence. The system acknowledged the command and entered temporary silent mode. Outside, Jang's tone softened as he spoke to Dr. Bake, assuming the prince was still asleep, but as the door opened, he froze. Cheon was sitting upright in bed, his eyes faintly open, staring back at them. Jang rushed forward, his voice rising with urgency as he called out to him. Relief mixed with disbelief at seeing the prince awake, yet as he neared, his expression twisted, and he instinctively covered his nose. Yeowon's eyes flickered with embarrassment as he recalled the dark liquid coating his skin earlier. He had forgotten entirely about the foul residue. Dr. Bake stepped closer, recognizing the prince and speaking to him calmly. Yeowon replied politely, recalling the physician who had once treated his mother during her illness. Bake extended his hand, requesting to examine the prince's pulse. Yeowon hesitated briefly but complied when reassured. The doctor placed his fingers over Yeowon's wrist, closing his eyes as he focused. Moments passed in silence before Bake's eyes opened wide in astonishment. He appeared taken aback by what he had sensed. Jang immediately asked what was wrong, concern tightening his voice. The doctor's surprise shifted into something else, curiosity and faint admiration. He shook his head with a slight smile and explained that nothing was wrong. Jang looked at the doctor with confusion, unable to grasp the reason for his astonishment. Dr. Bake explained that the prince's body showed no trace of toxins or impurities. Every part of him, from his blood flow to his energy channels, had been cleansed and activated. He asked if Yeowon had consumed any rare medicine capable of causing such transformation. Yeowon, still uncertain of what the doctor meant, asked for clarification. Dr. Bake then stated that his body had reached a state of perfection, the ideal condition for martial training. Yeowon's thoughts stirred as realization struck him. The black, sticky substance covering his skin might not have been random filth, but waste expelled from his body. His focus turned inward as he silently questioned the Nano Machine, asking if it was responsible. The Nano Machine responded by requesting confirmation to deactivate silent mode. Yeowon gave the command without hesitation. Once reactivated, the voice explained that the Nano Machine spread throughout his system had extracted all impurities from his body. They had also reshaped his blood vessels, joints, and muscles to optimize his physical structure. Yeowon's confusion deepened, the situation still far beyond belief. He questioned the entity again, asking if it truly wasn't the evil god his cult worshipped. The Nano Machine repeated that it was not divine. It was a machine, not Ma Sin. A faint thought crossed Yeowon's mind as he remembered Dr. Bake's background in the Poison Clan. Revealing the Nano Machine's existence could bring danger, and he resolved to keep it hidden. The system reassured him that such secrecy was unnecessary, explaining that the technology of this era was far too primitive to detect its presence. Meanwhile, Dr. Bake observed the prince silently, his expression thoughtful. He was convinced that someone had assisted Yeowon in his survival, though he could not determine who. After completing his examination, Bake concluded that there was nothing abnormal in the prince's body. He decided to prescribe a tonic to help restore his energy. Jang expressed his gratitude and offered to escort the doctor out, but Bake refused politely. He instructed Jang to remain behind and continue watching over the prince while he departed on his own. As Dr. Bake walked down the corridor, his thoughts lingered on the boy he had just examined. Something about the transformation defied logic. Not long ago, Cheon Yeo Woon's frail body and lack of martial knowledge had marked him as a child doomed to obscurity, destined to be cast aside in the competition among heirs. Yet the youth he had just seen was completely different. His pulse, his vitality, even the flow of energy within him, everything had reached an extraordinary state. Baek reflected that, with his current condition, the boy could learn martial arts faster than any of the other princes. The possibility unsettled him. He considered the prince's lineage, the illegitimate son of the lord, and wondered if the boy's indifference toward martial training had been nothing more than an act. If the lord had offered secret assistance, there would be no reason to admit it publicly. A faint smile touched his lips at the thought. The upcoming opening of the demonic academy, he realized, would not pass quietly. Inside the chamber, Yeo Woon exhaled softly, relief spreading through him. He believed the doctor had not discovered anything unusual. His thoughts turned briefly toward gratitude. Though the Nano Machine had healed his wounds, he knew that without Guard Jang's timely arrival, he would have died on that forest floor. He turned toward Jang to express his thanks, but before the words could leave his mouth, Jang interrupted, his tone firm yet respectful. He advised that the prince should first wash, unable to bear the lingering stench any longer. Yeo Woon paused, then agreed quietly. The smell was unbearable even to him. Jang immediately called for a servant to clean the bed and prepare hot water for a bath. When the tub was ready, Yeo Woon immersed himself in the warmth. As he leaned back, a strange sensation washed over him, one he could neither name nor understand. While sitting in the warm water, Yeo Woon directed his thoughts toward the system within him, questioning the extent of its abilities. The Nano Machine responded instantly, confirming its presence and awaiting instruction. He recalled the earlier moment when it had mentioned placing his body into a self-healing state and asked how far that capability extended. The system explained that any wound, internal or external, resulting from external force could be repaired rapidly. However, injuries involving severe blood loss or decapitation would require more time, as they depended on the process of cell regeneration. Yeo Woon found the explanation overly complex. He decided that understanding it through experience would be simpler. Reaching for the dagger that lay upon his folded clothes, he drew the blade across his palm. A sharp sting followed, and pain flared briefly as blood welled up from the shallow cut. The Nano Machine immediately registered the injury, announcing the activation of its self-healing function. The bleeding ceased within seconds, and the wound vanished without a trace. His palm appeared untouched, the skin smooth and unbroken. Yeo Woon stared at it, disbelief flickering across his features. The event defied everything he knew, yet it was undeniable. The wound was gone. He acknowledged silently that the system's claim was real. Then he thought of the vast information that had been transferred to his mind earlier, and wondered if he truly had access to all those functions. The Nano Machine confirmed that every operation described in the instructions was fully available for use. Satisfied, Yeo Woon resolved to test them later, once he had finished bathing. When he finally rose from the tub, he noticed something that startled him. His body was no longer the same. The frail frame he once carried had been replaced by lean, defined muscle. His posture felt stronger, balanced, and every motion carried an unfamiliar precision. He questioned the system about the sudden transformation, demanding to know if it was responsible. The Nano Machine answered affirmatively, stating that his physical structure had been reconstructed. At that moment, a maid entered the chamber, respectfully announcing her purpose to dress him. Yeo Woon gave a quiet nod, allowing her to proceed. As she worked, the Nano Machine continued its explanation within his mind. It clarified that while creating matter from nothing was scientifically impossible, modifying and reshaping the existing structure of his body required no such creation, only precise reconstruction. Yeo Woon grew frustrated with the way the machine communicated. Its explanations were always precise, yet endlessly complex. He admitted inwardly that listening to it made everything he had once learned feel trivial. Deciding to simplify matters, he shortened its name, stating that he would call it Nano instead of its full designation. The system acknowledged the change and accepted the name. He looked around his study, uncertain what to do next. The shelves were lined with old scrolls and books, most of them related to martial arts theory, topics he had once avoided. Seeking direction, he asked the system what he should begin with. Nano instructed him to select a book, open it, and flip through every page. The task seemed oddly simple, and Yeo Woon questioned if that was truly all that was required. The system confirmed it without elaboration. He scanned the titles on the table, noting that most were concerned with chi flow and pressure points. One text caught his attention, a manual detailing the internal energy system known as 3JSIM, a breathing method said to refine both body and mind. Yet he knew from the stories of countless practitioners that even a lifetime of training barely allowed one to reach its lowest stage. Deciding that studying blood points would yield more direct understanding, he reached for a book on the subject and began. As instructed, he flipped through the pages one after another. The action felt meaningless at first, but he obeyed nonetheless. Within moments, he reached the final page without realizing how quickly his pace had accelerated. His focus had deepened unconsciously. When he finished, a faint signal resonated in his mind. Nano confirmed that the process was complete. The book titled Blood Passage had been fully scanned, and the system was ready to transfer its contents directly into his brain. It requested his permission to begin the transfer. Only then did he understand what had happened. He gave his consent. consent. The transfer began. A jolt like lightning struck his skull as the Nano Machine's manual poured into his mind. Pain flared and images cascaded. He doubled over, retching as the flood of data rearranged itself inside his head. The Nano Machine indicated that the information transfer had completed. Dizziness washed over him. The Nano Machine noted that he would soon acclimate. Yeo Woon asked whether the Nano Machine was worried for him. The Nano Machine replied that it was merely stating a fact. Yeo Woon, annoyed, muttered an insult under his breath and asked what to do next. Nano explained that to use the acquired knowledge he would have to call it up by thought. Yeo Woon summoned the lesson on blood points, recalling that they governed circulation and could be classified into immobilizing points and killing points, that striking an immobilizing point would render a body motionless. A sudden realization seized him. The transfer was not mere memorization. The knowledge in his head unfolded into true understanding. The Nano Machine reported that it had corrected errors in the book before completing the transfer. Yeo Woon, surprised, asked whether the text had been wrong. The Nano Machine confirmed it had corrected mistakes concerning the blood points. Yeo Woon stared, incredulous, the revelation settling into cold, clear resolve. He realized the transfer meant he could learn and master martial arts far faster than anyone else. The noble candidates from the 6 clans had trained since infancy and already mastered countless techniques. Even after watching them, he had failed to grasp the 3 Jason method. His study held few martial texts, but the demonic academy housed many. With this new ability, he resolved to grow stronger, faster than any rival. The academy would become the place to prove that resolve. Far away in the air candidate's chamber of the South Castle, House Bakmajong, Prince Mukum learned that 5 men he had sent to kill 1 boy were dead. He found the outcome unreasonable and concluded someone had intervened on the boy's behalf. A guard suggested the possibility of secret assistance. Mukum snapped at the guard for speaking out of turn, then reflected that, having dismissed the boy as lowborn, he had expected the task to be simple. The failure implied the boy had hidden resources or protection, and Mukum wondered if their father might be involved. Clenching his fist, Mukum resolved to act personally. He decided he would end the threat himself at the demonic academy. Yeo Woon's mother had died when he was 10. The Lord had sent Dr. Bake to tend her, but it was too late. The cause was poisoning. Yeo Woon himself had been poisoned as well, yet survived after taking the medicine Bake provided. After that day, Jong took responsibility for preparing the prince's food. Jong rose before dawn to train, and then to prepare Yeo Woon's breakfast. On this morning, he practiced dagger work. Yeo Woon watched with a long face, knowing the day had come. Once he entered the academy, Jong's protection would end. He wondered if it would have been better to learn Jong's dagger technique in secret, but immediately dismissed the thought. Secretly training would only draw the 6 clans' scrutiny. He recalled the vow he had made after his mother's death, not to pursue martial arts until admitted to the academy. The Nano Machine proposed scanning Jong's movements. Yeo Woon's eyes widened at the revelation that the system could scan another person's technique. The Nano Machine confirmed it could. Yeo Woon asked whether Nano could scan guard Jang's martial training and transfer it into his mind. Nano confirmed the possibility and added that its program contained data on various martial techniques it could also transfer immediately. Yeo Woon hesitated over the ethics of stealing another's technique without permission, then dismissed the doubt. He would enter the academy that afternoon with no regrets and no time to hesitate. He asked the Nano to proceed. The Nano activated its movement scan. Yeo Woon's focus blurred as the system scanned Jong's motions. After observing the guard for about 30 minutes, Nano announced the scan's completion and began the transfer to Yeo Woon's brain. A sharp jolt filled his head as the movement playback unfolded in his mind, and when it ended, he found the experience easier to bear than the previous day. Astonishment flashed across his eyes. The result exceeded mere surprise. He grabbed the dagger and drew it from its sheath, convinced he could now employ Jang's dagger technique. Yeo Woon realized he needed to act cautiously so Jang would not notice. He closed the window to conceal himself and took position inside the room. He adopted the same stance Jang had shown moments earlier, the base posture used before executing the dagger technique. With focus sharp as a blade, he swung his arm, imitating the strike. Though he had never learned nor practiced the skill formally, his movements aligned perfectly with Yang's outside. The guard had spent 20 years refining that technique. Yeo Woon reproduced it flawlessly after a single observation. He understood what this meant: the years of repetition, the gradual correction of posture, the slow mastery of movement. All those steps that shaped a martial artist's growth had been bypassed. Nano's voice echoed in his mind, stating that while scanning Jong's technique, it had also completed a muscle analysis necessary for the movement's training. It asked if he would accept the transfer to his muscles. Yeo Woon questioned the need for it, uncertain of its purpose. Before he could finish the thought, pain tore through him. him. Every muscle in his body convulsed violently, locking him in place. The agony was sharp, consuming, and robbed him of breath. He demanded an explanation. The Nano responded calmly, explaining that through repetition, the body normally forms the correct muscular structure for each movement. His body, however, lacked that development, and attempting the advanced technique without adaptation had caused internal strain and muscle damage. Yeo Woon acknowledged that the Nano had performed some kind of transfer, but requested a simpler explanation. The Nano immediately adjusted, stating that it would translate its language to better match his level of understanding. The phrasing made Yeo Woon pause, a faint sense of offense rising at the implication. Once the translation completed, the Nano explained that unlike Jang, Yeo Woon had not trained long enough for his body to adapt. Though his brain now possessed the knowledge of the technique, his muscles were unaccustomed to its movements. To correct this, his muscles would need to undergo a simulated process that would build familiarity with the skill. Only after this transfer could he execute the movements properly. Yeo Woon found the simplified explanation easier, though still complex, prompting the Nano to offer to reduce the language level even further. Irritated, Yeo Woon refused and summarized the point himself. If he accepted the muscle transfer, the pain would disappear. The Nano confirmed this and asked if he wished to proceed. It explained that the process would require the use of every nanomachine within his body and would last several hours. Yeo Woon calculated the time before his departure for the academy and agreed to begin. The Nano warned that the procedure would cause significant pain and that anesthesia would be administered shortly. Yeo Woon hesitated, asking how severe the pain would be. The Nano responded with statistical precision, noting that there had been 1,350,000 recorded instances of fainting caused by the same muscle transfer process. Yeo Woon questioned his own resolve, uncertain if he could withstand what was coming. The Nano Machine asked if he wished to attempt the transfer without anesthesia. Yeo Woon agreed, but requested that anesthesia be applied should he fail to endure it. The system confirmed his request and initiated the process. As millions of nanomachines converged within his body, a faint ticklish sensation spread through his limbs. For a brief moment, it seemed harmless, until the restructuring began. The pain struck all at once. His muscles twisted violently beneath his skin, spasming with unnatural force. The shock was unbearable. His eyes rolled back, breath caught between his teeth. A low, broken sound escaped his throat, half scream, half suppressed groan. The Nano registered his distress and announced that anesthesia was being administered. A final strained breath left his lips before darkness claimed him. Meanwhile, Jang had finished his morning training and was preparing breakfast. He considered making something special for the prince, though he settled on the simple meal Yeo Woon preferred. As he cooked, his thoughts drifted. It had been 5 years since he began preparing meals for the young prince, and in that time, he had learned more about cooking than combat. His mind wandered to the memory of Yeo Woon's mother, her voice weak and fading as she entrusted her son to him. He whispered her name inwardly, remembering her death from poisoned food and praying silently that her spirit would protect her son now that he was set to enter the academy. Then from the prince's chamber, a faint yet unmistakable sound pierced the still air, a muffled cry of pain rising into a desperate groan. Jang's instincts took hold. He seized his sword and sprinted toward the sound. When he burst into the room, his eyes widened in alarm. Yeo Woon lay half collapsed on the bed, his upper body twisted unnaturally. He pressed his fingers to Yeo Woon's wrist, feeling for a pulse. It was steady, calm, almost identical to how it had been when he found him unconscious on the mountain 2 years earlier. Relief flickered through him. The boy was alive, but as he rose, something unusual caught his attention. On the wooden floor near the bed were faint traces, impressions of footsteps. He crouched and examined them closely. The markings were deliberate, spaced evenly, and carried a pattern that was instantly familiar. He placed his own foot against one and followed the rhythm of its placement. Recognition struck him at once. The prince mirrored the movements of his own dagger technique, each step a perfect reflection of the style he had trained for 2 decades. Disbelief filled his mind. The prince had only ever watched him practice from a distance, and even then, not consistently. 2 years of observation had somehow equaled 20 years of experience. He glanced back at Yeo Woon, unconscious and still, and then quietly turned away, leaving the room in silence. Inside Yeo Woon's mind, the Nano Machine completed its process. It reported that the transfer of muscle and fiber data had finished and began deactivating anesthesia. A sharp jolt rippled through his head, and his eyes opened abruptly. His chest rose in uneven breaths as he steadied himself, exhaustion lingering in his limbs. He muttered under his breath, vowing never to undergo that again. The Nano reminded him that it had already issued a warning about the pain. Yeo Woon's gaze moved around the room, noticing subtle signs that something had been disturbed. He wondered if Jang had entered while he was unconscious. The thought passed quickly as he stood and walked to the center of the chamber. He drew in a slow breath and prepared to move. His body felt lighter, different. The Nano confirmed that the transfer had provided him with the muscular refinement of someone who had trained those movements for 20 years. Yeo Woon steadied his stance and swung the dagger once more. The result was immediate. The power behind his movements had transformed. Each motion flowed with sharp precision and control, unlike before. As he stepped forward to transition into the next strike, his heel struck the wooden floor with unexpected unexpected force. A loud crack echoed through the room. He froze. The floorboards beneath him bore deep impressions, perfect outlines of his feet. Panic set in. If Jang saw this, there would be no explanation. He quickly tried to smooth the marks with his hands, pressing against the dents, but the wood refused to yield. A knock sounded at the door. Jang's voice followed, announcing that breakfast was ready. Yeo Woon tensed and pressed harder against the floor, but it was useless. Before he could think of another plan, the door creaked open and Jang stepped inside. Startled, Yeo Woon turned abruptly toward him, forcing a smile and blurting out that he was unusually hungry that morning. Jang raised a brow, noting that the prince typically preferred eating by the window. Yeo Woon quickly explained that since he would soon be leaving for the academy, he wanted to eat in the center of the room for once. Inside, unease flickered through his thoughts as he prayed Jang hadn't noticed anything unusual. His gaze drifted toward the meal: stir-fried bok choy, roast pork, and rice topped with a fried egg. Each dish was one of his favorites. Warmth filled his chest as he realized how carefully Jang had prepared this meal, perhaps knowing it might be their last breakfast together before his departure. That emotion stirred too strongly, and suddenly the Nano's voice intruded, analyzing his body's reaction. It stated that the fluctuation in emotion was increasing acid in his esophagus, and that saliva secretion had been raised to counteract it. It instructed him to swallow the food slowly to neutralize the acid. Frustration welled inside him. He mentally snapped at the system, demanding it stop speaking nonsense and remain silent. The Nano confirmed it would enter mute mode, and silence settled within Yeo Woon's mind. He picked up his chopsticks and began to eat, tears welling in his eyes as he savored each bite. Jang watched him carefully, urging him to slow down before he made himself sick. Yeo Woon nodded and continued until the meal was done, setting the chopsticks aside with a faint smile and thanking his guard sincerely. But Jang's expression had changed. His gaze shifted to the floor, and his tone grew measured as he asked when the prince had begun learning his dagger technique. Caught off guard, Yeo Woon froze. He stammered, pretending not to understand, but Jang had already stepped forward and pushed the table aside. There, marked clearly into the wood, was a single footprint, deep, deliberate, and unmistakable. The guard's eyes narrowed as he studied it. The impression matched the second movement of his own dagger formation, executed with perfect accuracy. It was clearer than what he had seen before, confirming what he already suspected. Inside, Yeo Woon's thoughts churned. He knew that in Murim, stealing another's martial arts technique was forbidden, a grave offense among warriors. Guilt settled heavy in his chest. Jang, however, did not react with anger. Instead, he lowered himself to one knee, his voice soft and calm. He told Yeo Woon that he had done well. Learning in secret was no crime in his eyes. He reminded the prince that he was his guard, sworn to protect him. If not for the oath imposed by the 6 clans, he would have willingly taught him the technique long ago. Yeo Woon's vision blurred as tears filled his eyes again, the unexpected kindness cutting deeper than any reprimand. Then Jang reached into his robe and pulled out a folded sheet of paper covered in precise markings and notes. He handed it to Yeo Woon, who looked at it in confusion. Jang explained that it contained the internal energy circulation method, the Naigong. Yeo Woon asked why Jang was giving him the paper. Jang explained that he wished to offer guidance on how to train the Naigong, but the academy would hold knowledge far greater than anything he could provide. He advised the prince to learn from what awaited him there. Yeo Woon's eyes welled with tears. They spilled freely before he could restrain them, his shoulders trembling as he turned away. Since the day his mother had died, he had vowed never to cry again. Yet the emotion now broke through that restraint. Jang quietly gathered the dishes from the table, his thoughts heavy. It had been 5 years since Lady Hua's death. During those years, he had endured his own pain and taken on the burden of caring for the boy she left behind. No matter how disciplined Yeo Woon had grown, he was still a child deprived of a mother's warmth, a son still aching for affection. At the doorway, Jang paused and spoke without turning. He reminded the prince that once he entered the academy, they would part ways. He told him it was all right to cry today, but after that, he must grow stronger, strong enough to stand on his own. Yeo Woon wiped his tears and thanked him. As Jang stepped out, silence settled over the room. Yeo Woon stared down at the Naigong scroll in his hand and drew a steady breath. He promised himself that from that moment on, he would neither fear nor hesitate. His mother was gone, yet he still had a home to fight for, a place to return to. Later that afternoon, the streets surrounding the demonic cult's great castle came alive with noise and movement. The air was thick with anticipation as the opening ceremony of the demonic academy drew near. Boys between the ages of 14 and 19, heirs of every family and clan within the cult, gathered from all directions. Among the crowd gathered before the grand gates of the demonic academy, murmurs rippled through the young heirs. One of them spoke first, his tone filled with uncertainty, asking if all the clans had arrived and how many stood before the academy. Another replied that there must have been at least 1,000 present. Their voices carried a shared unease. Now that they stood at the threshold of the academy, nerves replaced confidence. For those from smaller clans, the tension was even sharper. From atop the massive stage that overlooked the gathering, a middle-aged man with long crimson hair emerged. His sharp eyes swept across the sea of candidates with open disdain. A faint scoff escaped him as he studied their restless faces. To him, they were nothing but children playing at strength, unaware that this academy might well become their grave. He was Fire King Lee Ha-meng, the Left Guardian, the man closest to the Lord himself, ranked among the demonic cult's most powerful. His mere presence silenced the murmuring crowd. Whispers spread quickly among the students. They recognized the fiery hair, the hardened expression. The Left Guardian, a warrior counted among the top 10 of the cult's masters. Some said even top 5. Ha-meng's gaze shifted toward the first row, where the heirs of the 6 main clans stood in quiet confidence. Ha-meng's gaze shifted toward the first row, where the heirs of the 6 main clans stood in quiet confidence. Chun Muyon of the Wise clan, Chun Kung-won of the Sword clan, Chun Mukum of the Loyal clan, Chun Jongsum of the Poison clan, Chun Yuchen of the Blade clan, and Chun Wanryu of the Sound clan. The sole female candidate among them. He counted through the names, and his brow furrowed. The 7th name, Cheon Yeo Woon, was missing. Elsewhere, Yeo Woon stood near the registration point, waiting quietly. The guard checking names frowned, noting the absence of the 7th prince's tag. He apologized and asked Yeo Woon to wait until it was found. Yeo Woon agreed calmly, though inwardly he understood the reason behind the delay. It was no accident. The 6 clans had ensured he would not stand beside them. A calculated humiliation, a reminder that he was not one of them. He accepted it without reaction. Open conflict now would serve no purpose. The heirs of the 6 clans had always viewed him as less than equal, their hatred dating back to the day his mother died. They had tried to end his life more times than he could count. He clenched his jaw as determination settled over him. No matter what they plotted, he had survived every attempt. He would survive this as well. The murmurs rippled through the sea of candidates as a single figure drew their attention. A boy wearing a black name tag marked with the number 7. Whispers rose like a tide around him. The crowd recognized what that mark meant. An heir candidate not born of the 6 clans. Rumor had it he had never mastered a single form of martial arts. To them, it was certain that such a weakling would be the first to fall once the trials began. Cheon Yeo Woon heard only fragments, but he didn't need to catch every word. He already understood the meaning behind their stares and laughter. He let them talk. Their mockery would fade long before his determination would. From the stage above, Fire King Lee Ha-meng surveyed the crowd. His sharp gaze finally found the one he sought. The 7th prince standing alone at the far end. A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. To him, it was absurd that the illegitimate son of the Lord stood separated from the rest. Even now, that isolation seemed to cling to him like a shadow, yet in a way, Ha-meng found it almost fitting. A horn's low, thunderous blare cut through the noise, silencing the crowd in an instant. Heads turned toward the grand entrance as the air shifted, heavy and reverent. The Lord had arrived. Beside the Lord walked 2 of the most powerful figures of the cult. To his left, Great Guardian King Markham, his face hidden behind a flawless silver mask that concealed his identity from all. To the right stood a man dressed in tattered, dirt-streaked robes. Right Guardian Ha-meng, known infamously as the Crazy Blade. Ha-meng clicked his tongue in disapproval at the sight of his counterpart's unkempt state, muttering under his breath about the man's drunkenness. Ha-meng caught the glare and barked back with irritation, his temper quick to ignite. Their exchange was cut short by a sharp, commanding glance from Markham, whose silent authority demanded order. At the center of it all, seated upon the high throne draped in gold silk embroidered with the single golden character, Sky, was the ruler of the demonic cult, Chun Yujong, the Lord himself. He was one of the 5 strongs of Wulin, the man who stood above every master of the cults, and the father of Cheon Yeo Woon. Markham stepped forward onto the stage, his movement sharp and composed. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of immense power. Silence! The sound rippled across the vast training ground, striking through the noise like a force of nature. The crowd obeyed instantly, every whisper, every breath stilled. He bowed deeply toward the throne and declared that preparations were complete. Lord Chun Yujong rose from his seat. The air around him shifted, vibrating faintly under the pressure of his presence. He welcomed the new students, calling them the future of the demonic cult, the strength that would carry its name forward. From the crowd came renewed cries of devotion. Thousands of young voices echoed as one. Among them, Cheon Yeo Woon stood in silence, his gaze fixed on the man atop the stage. His father. 15 years had passed without a word or glance, and now, for the first time, their eyes met. The Lord's expression remained cold, distant. His gaze acknowledged the boy's presence, but carried no warmth, no hint of recognition beyond duty. A quiet ache settled in Yeo Woon's chest, though he showed no sign of it. His thoughts hardened. He had expected nothing from that man, the one who had never come even when his mother had died. Ha-meng's voice soon broke the stillness, powerful and commanding, declaring the end of the Lord's address and the beginning of the true ceremony. The crowd buzzed buzzed with murmurs until Fire King Lee Ha-meng's voice thundered over them, cutting through the chatter like a blade. He commanded the candidates to stand straight and pay attention. Then he spoke with deliberate clarity, outlining the path that awaited them. The Demonic Academy would span 4 years and consist of 6 distinct stages. At the end of each stage, every student would face a test, one single chance to prove their worth. The murmurs returned instantly, louder this time, filled with disbelief and unease. The students whispered among themselves, asking if failure at the first attempt truly meant immediate expulsion. Ha-meng's lips curled into a grin. He confirmed their fears without hesitation. Those who failed would be cast out without mercy. His words sent a ripple of dread across the field. From the front row, a hand rose. It belonged to Cheon Yeo Woon, the proud heir of the Sword Clan. His voice carried confidence as he announced that he had a question. Ha-meng's response was immediate and scathing. He demanded to know who had given a bastard like him permission to speak. Shock rippled through the crowd. Kungwon's expression twisted in disbelief, his jaw tightening as his pride burned under the insult. But before he could retaliate, Ha-meng's grin widened. He reminded the boy that within the walls of this academy, every privilege of the 6 clans had been stripped away. Here they were equals, heirs or not. If Kungwon had a problem with that, he could leave before the trials began. The other heirs smirked at his humiliation, their laughter thin and cruel. Grinding his teeth, Cheon Yeo Woon bowed stiffly and offered an apology, though the resentment in his eyes remained. Ha-meng waved a hand dismissively. He knew what the question would have been anyway, the fairness of allowing only one chance per stage. His voice rose again as he explained that those who advanced would be rewarded. The reward was no minor token, the Black Dragon Ball. The crowd erupted once more, this time with excitement. Whispers spread quickly. The Black Dragon Ball was a legendary medicinal treasure said to grant 20 years worth of internal energy to its user. Some calculated aloud. Passing all 6 stages would mean gaining 120 years of Naegong, a level approaching that of a high expert. Yet not all shared the same optimism. Others muttered that such gifts were never without limits. The more one consumed, the weaker its effect became, and absorbing its energy completely was nearly impossible. If the Black Dragon Ball truly offered such power, the masters of the cult would have claimed every last one long ago. Yeo Woon listened intently, his thoughts racing as Ha-meng's words echoed across the field. The mention of the Black Dragon Ball had already ignited something within him. 6 stages, 6 chances. Each victory could grant years of Naegong, power that he had never possessed. For someone like him, born without status or inherited strength, this was no mere opportunity. It was a lifeline. Ha-meng's voice continued, outlining the second benefit, the Martial Arts Book of Secrets. Every student understood the weight of those words. The art of true cultivation lay within such manuals. Their techniques could shape destinies. The Left Guardian explained that the Academy's library spanned 5 floors, each representing a level of access. Passing each test would open one more floor. The higher one climbed, the more advanced the knowledge became, even reaching the secret manuals of the 6 clans or the hidden techniques of Morim's masters. The crowd erupted with excitement. Some shouted that they could learn divine skills, others whispering of legendary arts. Yeo Woon's gaze sharpened. The treasures of martial knowledge were far more valuable to him than any elixir. To survive, martial skill mattered more than power itself. But Ha-meng's next words struck like a cold wind. He told them bluntly that most would never make it beyond the 4th floor. The 5th, he said, was a dream none of them would touch, not even if resurrected. From his place on the stage, Right Guardian Submeng took a swig from his flask, suppressing a grin. His thoughts were laced with mockery. Ha-meng was a master at lifting morale just to crush it moments later. Ha-meng, unfazed, moved to the 3rd and final benefit. Within the academy, the concept of rank would be reborn. Every student, regardless of origin, would start without title or privilege. Status from the outside world meant nothing here. Cheon Yeo Woon, standing in the front row, understood the implication immediately. Within these walls, the hierarchy of bloodline would crumble. The weak, even if noble, would fall. The strong, even if nameless, would rise. From this moment on, only strength would decide who survived. Ha-meng outlined the new system clearly. Those who passed the first stage would become low-ranked warriors. The second stage would grant middle-ranked warrior, the third high-ranked warrior, then squad leader for the 4th, and clan leader for the 5th. When it came to the 6th stage, he dismissed it with a scoff, saying it didn't matter. None of them would reach it anyway. Submeng's thoughts drifted darkly as he listened. To him, the 6th stage wasn't even a test. It was legend. In the centuries since the Academy's founding, fewer than 10 had ever passed it. Ha-meng announced that the Academy would acknowledge rank for those who rose through the upper levels, and that all candidates would begin at the same cadet rank but diverge as they advanced. Yeo Woon realized sharply that surviving until now had been only the first hurdle. True survival would now require climbing the ranks. Ha-meng ordered the formation of groups and the assignment of dorms, revealing that the first test would begin immediately. The students reacted with stunned disbelief. No one had expected an exam on the opening day. Ha-meng cut through their murmurs with a warning. Failure on this test meant expulsion. The first exam would assess basic skills and require foundational Naegong. Those lacking it would be relegated to agricultural, commercial, and service districts, places where survival would be precarious at best. Yeo Woon felt the weight of it crush his hope. The oath that had kept him from learning Naegong now threatened to consign him to the lowest tier of the cult, where any hand might strike to finish him. Hameng's smirk softened into a sardonic clarification that the academy still needed people for the dirty work, but the insult cut little comfort. In the crowd, Chun Mukom watched with satisfaction. The academy's rules did the killing he had planned to perform with his own hand. Someone had engineered the perfect solution. A hush swept across the field as a woman stepped onto the stage, graceful, poised, and captivating. Her beauty was disarming, but the quiet strength beneath it demanded reverence. Hameng gestured toward her, his voice echoing through the air. She was Hang Soyu, clan leader of the Sound clan and the proctor for their first trial, the fifth elder of the demonic cult. Hameng's tone grew sharp as he addressed the students once more, warning that the test before them was simple, yet merciless. Failing it meant never rising even to the rank of a low warrior. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. To summon the leader of the Sound clan for an entrance test seemed excessive. What kind of trial required the presence of a master whose music could bend energy itself? As her fingers brushed the strings, realization dawned among the candidates. Fear followed quickly. Students across the field covered their ears and crouched down. Hameng smirked faintly and reassured them, though reassure might not have been the right word. He explained that if the fifth elder released her full musical energy wave, none of them would last a heartbeat. Fortunately, she would restrain it, though perhaps, with enough luck, even those without Naegong might survive a minute. Cheon Yeo Woon's stomach tightened. The test was clear. Endure the Sound clan leader's energy wave. He clenched his fists. Hameng's declaration came sharp and final. Those who could withstand 1 minute without fainting would pass. At his signal, the elder's fingers descended upon the strings. The first notes rang out, hauntingly beautiful, but carrying a vibration that cut through the air like invisible blades. The melody rippled across the field, graceful yet merciless. Within moments, the sound overwhelmed the weaker students. Dozens collapsed instantly, foam forming at their mouths as they convulsed on the ground. The music deepened, elegant yet suffocating. The vibration reached the chest, shaking hearts and bursting veins. Some clutched at their ears, others at their chests, eyes rolling back as they fell. Hameng watched without emotion, his gaze sweeping over the chaos. As expected, the smaller clans fell first. Only those from the 6 great clans and the higher bloodlines still stood. Chun Mukom's laughter rang over the chaos, sharp and cruel. He mocked the others' pain, boasting that the heirs of the 6 clans had trained under the protection of potent medicines since childhood, elixirs that filled their bodies with Naegong. For someone like Cheon Yeo Woon, born without any internal power, this test should have been instant death. Mukom imagined him already collapsed, writhing on the ground. But then, confusion flickered across his smug expression. Something was wrong. On the stage, Hang Soyu's gaze had shifted. Her fingers moved faster across the strings, plucking each note with growing force. The melody sharpened, its pressure intensifying. Her face, once serene, now carried a hint of irritation. Her attention was fixed on a single figure, Cheon Yeo Woon. He wasn't falling. Even as students around him dropped like broken marionettes, blood dripping from their ears, Yeo Woon remained standing. His posture was steady, his breathing controlled. Why? Hang Soyu's eyes narrowed, disbelief in her gaze. A boy with no Naegong should have been the first to collapse. Yet he stood unshaken, the waves of sound striking him without effect. Inside, Cheon Yeo Woon stared down at his hands, confusion rippling through his thoughts. Half the field lay scattered and convulsing, their bodies overwhelmed by internal injuries. And yet, he felt nothing, not even a tremor. The Nano Machine's voice resonated in his mind. Calm and clinical, it had detected the deadly high and low frequency waves produced by the Elder's instrument. Predicting critical harm to his body, it had activated emergency defense mode, isolating his auditory system and neutralizing the sound. Yeo Woon realized what had happened. The Nano had cut off his sense of hearing entirely. The crushing resonance that shattered others' minds could no longer reach him. He confirmed this suspicion mentally, and the Nano responded in its mechanical tone. His body's auditory perception had been temporarily suspended, while its communication was routed directly into his brain. As the chaos continued, Hang Soyu's gaze sharpened, predatory and searching. Her eyes met Yeo Woon's, a silent challenge crossing the field. The air between them seemed to still. He asked the Nano if it could block the Elder's gaze as it had done with sound. The answer came instantly. That would require blinding his vision. He gave a faint smirk and dismissed the thought. Even Fire King Hameng, who had watched countless initiations, found himself drawn in by the scene unfolding before him. From his place on the stage, he studied the fifth Elder's expression and movement. Her fingers struck the strings with a force that betrayed impatience, a rare loss of composure for someone of her skill. The Sound clan's art had clearly evolved. Even among the strong, this level of pressure would overwhelm anyone below 20 years of Naegong. Yet there he was, Cheon Cheon Yeo Woon, standing motionless in the storm. A faint smile tugged at Hameng's lips. So that's the cause of her irritation. He had heard rumors that the boy possessed no internal energy, but that clearly wasn't true. To withstand such a test with such composure required remarkable stability. It had been years since a first trial had caught his interest, years since something had stirred his sense of challenge. Let's see how long he lasts, he thought. Across the training ground, the sound intensified to a punishing degree. The pressure cracked the will of the weaker students. Blood dripped from their ears and nostrils as they collapsed, groaning in pain. Even those who managed to stand clenched their jaws in agony. The heirs of the six clans, enduring with their 30 years of cultivated Neigong, sensed the change in her tone and grew uneasy. They weren't supposed to turn around during the test, but curiosity burned stronger than caution. Chun Mukum broke first, twisting his head to glance behind him. What he saw almost made him choke in disbelief. There, in the farthest row, Cheon Yeo Woon still stood upright, unwavering. Mukum's expression twisted into rage. His shock drew the attention of the others. Chun Jongsum of the Poison Clan and Chun Wonryo of the Sound Clan turned as well, their eyes widening in disbelief. The sight left them all speechless. Yeo Woon, who had been mocked as the weak, bastard-born heir without Neigong, stood untouched in the storm of sound that had crippled hundreds. Their minds could not reconcile it. How could he endure this without energy circulation? Mukum's fury boiled to the surface, and realization struck him that Yeo Woon had Neigong and had lied to everyone. Across the field, Yeo Woon stood unwavering in the storm. Though deafened by the Nano's protection, he could read the hostility etched into every expression before him. Disbelief from the heirs, anger from the elder, wounded pride from all. Their hatred had deepened, not because of weakness, but because he had shown strength they could not accept. He understood the danger of it. If he emerged untouched, they would never believe his lack of Neigong. Suspicion would follow him, and that could prove fatal. A decision formed quietly within him, cold and precise. When the performance ended, his body would need to bleed. Nano processed his command, reluctant but obedient, preparing to inflict calculated internal damage. On the stage, Hang Soyu's calm fractured. Her music had turned fierce, the melody now carrying the edge of her frustration. Her pride would not allow this defiance. She had held back, playing with restraint, but not anymore. Her hand rose, trembling with power, and the air thickened under the weight of her will. Rage and pride converged into a single violent surge of energy. Hang Soyu's fingers struck the strings again, this time not with restraint, but with fury. Half of her internal power surged into the melody, transforming beauty into destruction. From the stage, Lee Hameng sensed the sudden escalation immediately. His expression hardened, the shift in energy unmistakable. The resonance had grown volatile, dangerously so. The field erupted into chaos. Students clutched their chests and screamed as blood burst from their lips. Even the heirs of the six clans faltered, their bodies trembling under the unbearable vibration. Hameng's command cut through the storm, his voice heavy with urgency as he ordered the fifth elder to stop. The force behind his tone matched the severity of the moment. The strings fell silent. The sudden stillness was deafening. Those who had managed to endure collapsed to their knees, gasping for air, their bodies quivering from the aftershock. The ground was littered with the fallen, blood marking the soil. Submeng muttered in irritation, his eyes narrowing at the sight. Had the elder pushed even a little further, none would have survived the first test. It was unthinkable that one of the cult's 5 elders had allowed emotion to overpower control. Hang Soyu's pride had cracked. The realization of her lapse left her embarrassed. Yet beneath that embarrassment simmered lingering fury, all directed toward the boy who still stood. She was certain he had broken his oath. Then, before anyone could speak, Cheon Yeo Woon's body convulsed. His face flushed deep red, then turned ghostly pale. Blood burst from his mouth, spraying across the ground like a crimson tide. The spectators froze. Hameng's frown deepened. Soyu's anger faltered into shock. Mukum's smug satisfaction twisted into confusion. The sheer volume of blood was unnatural. No human body should have held that much. Yeo Woon staggered, eyes wide, mind spinning as agony coursed through him. Inside his consciousness, the Nano's voice responded with cold precision. It reported that his order had been executed. 30% of his internal organs had been damaged, forcing severe internal bleeding. Pain seared through him as more blood rose to his throat. He wanted to curse aloud, but the convulsion silenced him. He fell forward, vomiting again, until the ground beneath him was soaked in red. Unlike the fifth elder, who stood frozen in disbelief, left guardian Lee Hameng could not remain still. The sight of the Lord's son collapsing under the elder's test sent a chill through him. If Cheon Yeo Woon were to die here, not by the hands of rivals, but within the academy's own walls, the fault would rest entirely upon him. He moved instantly, his body blurred into motion, slicing through the air as his movement skill carried him across the field. Dust swirled in his wake as he appeared beside the fallen boy, his hand catching Yeo Woon just before his body struck the ground. Yeo Woon's vision swam, the world bending in fragments of light and shadow. Inside him, the Nano responded without hesitation, detecting critical blood loss and internal trauma, activating its self-healing protocol. He tried to speak, to hold off the process process for a moment longer, but his strength barely allowed the thought to form. Hameng's eyes narrowed as he examined the boy's ashen face. He had seen many collapse under lesser strain, yet something about this youth defied reason. Any other would have perished long before now. The left guardian extended his senses to assess the boy's Naegong, expecting at least a trace of hidden power. What he found instead made his heart jolt. There was nothing. No energy flow, no cultivation foundation. Only raw endurance and sheer will. Astonishment flickered in his eyes. The rumors of the Lord's illegitimate son had painted him as weak and untalented, yet the reality was far different. This was not talent. It was defiance made flesh. He straightened, composing his tone, and gestured sharply toward the edge of the field. The academy staff rushed in at once, lifting the bloodied boy with urgent care. As Yeo Woon's consciousness faded, he issued a single silent command within his mind, a desperate plea directed at the machine bound to him. The Nano complied immediately, beginning full restoration of his organs and blood flow. From the stage, Hang So-yu watched with a stony expression. The embarrassment of losing control still lingered, but it was not the only thing that unsettled her. Beneath her composure, irritation lingered, not for her own failure, but for the boy who had endured what should have broken them all. Hang So-yu's thoughts churned. It shouldn't have been possible. Someone without Naegong could not have survived, much less endured it as though it were nothing. Lee Hameng approached, his tone sharp and cold. What she had done had crossed the line. He reminded her with quiet venom that she had nearly killed the Lord's son. Her composure faltered. Embarrassment crept into her voice as she asked whether Yeo Woon truly possessed no internal energy. Hameng's answer came without hesitation. He had checked himself. There was nothing, not even the faintest flow of power. The boy had kept his oath. Hang So-yu's disbelief deepened. Her words stumbled out, unable to reconcile the truth. A student with no Naegong should have collapsed instantly, yet Yeo Woon had endured until the very end. Hameng's eyes, however, carried something beyond irritation. He told her plainly that the boy's endurance had been born from will alone. The realization silenced the fifth elder. Even she, with all her pride and strength, felt a flicker of unease. Inwardly, Hameng admitted what he could not say aloud. If the boy had not been an illegitimate son, he would have taken him under his wing without hesitation. Such will could not be taught. It was the kind that carved legends. But aligning himself against the six clans would mean ruin, and that was a path even he could not afford to tread. Submeng's laughter broke across the training ground, his tone almost playful as he commented on what he had just witnessed. The boy had endured, and that alone amused him. Hameng's response came laced with irritation, his patience wearing thin. He dismissed the drunkard's intrusion with clipped words, but Submeng, as always, had to have the last laugh. Their exchange escalated, the tension crackling between them like the edge of drawn blades. Submeng sneered, tossing another insult, and Hameng's retort came just as sharp, reminding him that if not for his title, the right guardian would have been long dead. The air shifted, wind howled faintly as the two guardians faced one another, their opposing auras pressing against the field like colliding storms. Students and elders alike froze where they stood, unable to breathe under the weight of their presence. For a moment, silence stretched taut. And then, with a smirk, Submeng turned away, brushing off the confrontation with a slur of arrogance. His steps were unsteady, but his voice carried clearly through the air, filled with disdain, mocking the fallen students as soft and weak. But as his gaze drifted briefly to Cheon Yeo Woon, a flicker of respect passed through his drunken eyes. Compared to the rest, that boy had grit. Behind the field, the atmosphere was different. The second floor of the academy's main building bustled quietly with the faint smell of medicine. Inside the first aid room, Baek Jong-meng, one of the academy's medical instructors, was preparing herbs and bandages. His eyes gleamed with anticipation. To him, the academy's opening day was a chance to study injuries firsthand, to learn, to observe, and perhaps to impress the elders who oversaw medical affairs. Then came the pounding on his door. Voices called out urgently from the hallway. He turned, excitement already stirring. Patience this soon meant the day was already interesting. The door burst open. Two academy staff entered, struggling to carry a body soaked in crimson. Jongmung's eyes gleamed with unrestrained excitement the moment the staff burst through the door. A patient on the first day, and exactly what he had hoped for. His enthusiasm filled the room, his voice booming as he declared that the demonic academy truly was the best. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, quietly acknowledging what they had heard. That this man, Baek Jong-woo's student, was brilliant, but utterly consumed by his obsession with medicine. Still, Jongmeng motioned for them to hurry, his tone snapping from glee to focus. But as he turned to examine the body on the stretcher, his expression shifted in an instant. His excitement drained away, replaced by alarm. The boy laid before him was drenched in blood. Jongmyeong froze. The wounds didn't make sense. There were no cuts, no blades, nothing visible. Yet the damage was severe. He questioned what kind of test could leave a person in such a state. The staff shook their heads gravely. The injury wasn't from any weapon. It was internal, deep, unseen. The left guardian himself had ordered that the patient be treated with special care. Jongmyeong's mind raced. In his 10 years of study under Baek Jong-woo, he had treated all manner of injuries. Broken bones, crushed ribs, ruptured meridians, but never this much blood from an internal collapse. It was a medical puzzle unlike any he had seen. He nodded to the staff, assuring them he would handle it, and they turned to leave. But as they exited, one of them paused, caught by something odd. For a fleeting moment, he thought the boy's face looked healthier, less pale. His superior barked at him to move, and he dismissed the thought with a nervous laugh, following the others out. Silence settled over the room once they were gone. Jongmyeong sat beside the bed, his fingers pressing lightly against the boy's wrist to read the pulse. And then, a twitch. Cheon Yeo Woon's eyelids fluttered open, the dim light reflecting faintly in his eyes. His body still ached, the pain dull but persistent. He realized at once what had happened. The Nano's healing had worked too well. He had felt the pain fade as he was being carried up, and that alone could have drawn suspicion. To avoid it, he had ordered the Nano to stop the recovery midway. Jongmyeong's brow furrowed as he examined the unconscious boy. His fingers lingered on Yeo Woon's wrist, reading the pulse carefully. It was irregular, erratic and fast, a clear sign of internal trauma, but even so, something about it didn't make sense. He muttered under his breath, confused by the contradiction before him. No external wounds, yet the sheer amount of blood was excessive. Even biting through one's tongue wouldn't cause this much loss. Still, he resolved to begin treatment the old-fashioned way. Acupuncture first, stabilize the energy flow, then assess the damage. As he was about to start the treatment, the door burst open with a crash. The sudden intrusion sent him stumbling backward until he landed unceremoniously on the floor. His gaze snapped toward the doorway, and his expression instantly soured. A man stood there, reeking of alcohol. It was the right guardian, Submeng. Submeng's laughter filled the room. He teased the younger doctor, recalling him as the timid apprentice who used to cling to his master. Jongmyeong's inner thoughts churned with quiet frustration. That same infuriating tone, the one that always carried just enough arrogance to make his skin crawl. Still, he forced a polite laugh and asked what brought the right guardian to the infirmary. Someone of his rank had no reason to visit unless seriously injured. The guardian's grin turned sharp, his voice dropping to a darker register as a faint bloodlust laced his words. Jongmyeong immediately straightened, bowing awkwardly and offering an unconvincing laugh, trying to diffuse the tension. Submeng ignored him completely. His gaze had already drifted past the doctor, settling on the figure lying motionless on the bed. Meanwhile, Yeo Woon, though feigning unconsciousness, could sense the man's presence instantly. The thick stench of liquor filled the air, sharp and oppressive. His mind tightened. If that man had seen through his act, if he suspected that Yeo Woon was not as injured as he appeared, the consequences would be unpredictable. The heavy stench of alcohol filled the air as Submeng approached with a wide grin, warning that if Yeo Woon continued to pretend, he would smack him. A sudden wave of internal energy surged through the room, lifting Yeo Woon upright from the bed. His body, still weakened and unhealed, could not resist as the force pinned him in place. Realizing there was no use in continuing the act, Yeo Woon opened his eyes and found himself face to face with the drunken man he had seen earlier on the stage. He was caught. Submeng's laughter echoed through the infirmary, mocking yet filled with curiosity. He found it amusing that the boy dared to show such boldness before a guardian. Any skilled warrior, he said, could discern false sleep from the rhythm of breathing alone. Yeo Woon's thoughts tightened, so he had been discovered through the sound of his breath. The Nano confirmed the detail with mechanical precision, reporting that his breathing rate had dropped to 8 times per minute, far below the natural rhythm for someone his age. Yeo Woon dismissed the unnecessary explanation in frustration. Submeng's laughter continued. He found the boy intriguing, brave and defiant in a way that others of his generation were not. Most would have broken or begged under hardship, yet this one still carried a spark of will. Before the tension could thicken further, Jongmyeong stepped forward and reminded the right guardian that the patient's condition was severe, urging that he be allowed to receive treatment first. Submeng's tone sharpened as he cut off Jongmyeong, demanding silence with the weight of authority. At that exact moment, Yeo Woon's body convulsed, a wet cough tearing through his chest as blood spilled past his lips. Jongmyeong, alarmed, stepped forward again, insisting that the patient's condition was worsening. The right guardian's eyes flicked toward Yeo Woon, finally noting the pallor spreading across his skin. With a grunt, he withdrew his nagong, releasing the pressure that held the boy upright. Yeo Woon collapsed back onto the bed, breath shallow and unsteady. Submeng regarded him for a moment, then spoke with sudden bluntness. Without preamble, he offered to take the boy as his apprentice. The words struck like lightning. Yeo Woon's eyes widened in disbelief, and even Jongmyeong froze in shock. To be chosen by Submeng, the crazy blade, one of the demonic cult's 10 strongest strongest warriors and a name known across all of Woolen, was beyond comprehension. Yeo Woon's thoughts wavered. He asked, uncertain and wary, what the Guardian meant by such an offer. Submeng clarified plainly. He wished to take him as a student. Still dazed, Yeo Woon questioned whether the Guardian understood who he was. Submeng only laughed, saying there was no one in the cult who didn't know the 7th Prince. Yeo Woon pressed further, voicing his concern that the 6 clans would despise such a decision. Submeng's laughter deepened, careless and fearless. What could they possibly do about it? They would continue scheming among themselves regardless. His choice changed nothing. Inside, Yeo Woon's mind wrestled between suspicion and temptation. It was an opportunity that could shift his fate entirely. Yet the thought of a hidden snare made him hesitate. Standing nearby, Jongmeng observed in silence, realization dawning. So this was the infamous 7th Prince, the one caught in the endless web of the 6 clans' politics. He had expected deceit, but not cruelty on this scale. To think they had gone so far as to make him spill that much blood for their power games. It was beyond shameful. Yeo Woon hesitated, still reeling from the sudden offer. He admitted he didn't know how to respond. It was too abrupt, and he was expected to have a teacher once the academy training began. Submeng's patience thinned instantly. His irritation flared as he barked that if the boy kept acting hesitant, it would look as though the mighty Right Guardian was begging for a disciple. He tilted back his bottle and drank deeply. Behind the drunken sharpness, a thought flickered in his mind. The boy was cautious, overly so, but that was expected of someone who had grown up surrounded by deceit and danger. Submeng set the bottle aside and leaned closer. His tone shifted from annoyance to something sharper, baiting Yeo Woon's resolve. If the boy needed proof, he would give it. From within his robes, he produced a piece of wrinkled parchment and placed it firmly on the bed. Yeo Woon's eyes moved to the paper, confusion evident. Submeng told him that what lay before him was exactly what he needed most. The one thing that could ensure his survival in the demonic academy. He reminded Yeo Woon of his situation as confined to the infirmary the very day the academy began. Others were already moving ahead, training, competing, and growing stronger. Even if Yeo Woon had passed the first test through sheer willpower, that alone wouldn't carry him through the next. Without Naegong, his chances of advancing were nearly non-existent. Submeng's voice grew firm. A warrior who failed to stay ahead was as good as dead. If Yeo Woon stayed in this room for weeks, his rivals would widen the gap until it was impossible to close. Yeo Woon clenched his fists under the blanket, unable to argue. The logic was undeniable, yet he couldn't leave so soon without drawing suspicion. Submeng watched him quietly, then asked if he knew why the red-haired left guardian had personally ordered him to the infirmary. Yeo Woon assumed it was because of his internal injuries, but Submeng's laugh was bitter. Of course that was the reason, he said, but didn't it strike him as odd? There were dozens of students who had suffered internal damage during the test, yet none of them had been sent here. He explained that most martial artists could recover such injuries through meditation alone. Treatment from a doctor or medicine only hastened the process. There was no real need for anyone to be hospitalized, except him. The implication settled heavily in the air. The others could heal on their own. He finally understood why he had been left alone in the infirmary. Because unlike the others, he could not heal himself through meditation. That was the reason they had isolated him. Submeng watched the recognition settle over him and grinned inwardly. The boy was sharp, cautious, and thoughtful. Almost there. It was time to drive the point home. His tone hardened as he reminded Yeo Woon of his weakness. A student who couldn't even meditate to recover. How could someone like that hope to heal internal wounds quickly enough to keep up? Yeo Woon's thoughts flickered in defiance. It was possible, though he could never admit why. With Nano's self-healing system, he could recover faster than any normal warrior, but Submeng's reasoning still stood. If he wanted to advance to the next stage, he would need Naegong. He spoke up, recalling what Hameng had promised, that passing the first test granted access to the first floor of the academy's library and the reward of a medicine ball. Submeng's laughter erupted, rough and amused. He called the redhead forgetful, saying there was something important Yeo Woon hadn't been told. When Yeo Woon asked what that was, the Right Guardian explained it plainly. The academy's library wasn't freely accessible. It was a heavily restricted vault. Students could only enter once after passing each stage. The words caught Yeo Woon off guard. The freedom he'd imagined was an illusion. Submeng continued, his voice low and deliberate. The library's most precious knowledge was guarded under strict control, and even those allowed entry could remain only for 2 hours on the first floor. Yeo Woon exhaled heavily, the weight of it settling in his chest. Every step forward was met with another barrier. Every gain followed by another test. It felt like climbing a mountain, only to find another rising behind it. Submeng explained that time within the library increased with each stage cleared, but access came with strict rules. Nothing could be written or copied. Every lesson had to be committed to memory before leaving. Memorizing even 2 books was considered remarkable. Yeo Woon's eyes glimmered faintly. What others saw as limitation, he saw as an opening. With Nano's scanning ability, he could absorb hundreds of texts within those 2 hours. Knowledge beyond what any student could dream of. Submeng continued, for someone Won without Naegong, surviving 4 years in the demonic academy would be a merciless ordeal. Yeo Woon understood the truth behind those words. Every other candidate had entered the academy already armed with their clan's martial arts and internal power. He had neither. Against the 6 clan's heirs, strength and skill were the only shields from death. If he was to survive their hatred, he needed power. And perhaps a powerful ally. His gaze shifted toward the crumpled parchment beside him. He asked if the text upon it contained the breath of Naegong. Submeng's grin returned, sharp and amused. The boy was quick. He confirmed that it was indeed the fundamental technique of breathing that formed the basis of all internal energy cultivation. And if Yeo Woon accepted him as his teacher, he would teach it to him immediately. Yeo Woon hesitated no longer. Whatever the Guardian's true intentions, he needed a foothold within this world. Someone capable of shielding him from the 6 clan's reach. What he had been denied by oath, he would now claim. This was his moment. With effort, he pushed himself upright, his body trembling from exhaustion and pain. Submeng watched silently, curiosity flickering behind his drunken eyes. Then, Yeo Woon lowered himself to the floor and bowed deeply, his voice steady despite his trembling frame. He accepted the Right Guardian as his teacher and swore to become his student. Submeng's expression shifted into satisfaction. Yeo Woon remained bowed, enduring the pain that coursed through him, and performed the second bow, the bow of commitment. As Yeo Woon bent forward for his final bow, an invisible force lifted him upright. The pressure was firm yet steady, the unmistakable surge of Naegong. Submeng's voice cut through the air, low and commanding. He told him to stand, declaring that the blood of Chun should never bow to anyone except the Lord himself. With a faint cough, Submeng shifted his tone, masking excitement behind his usual gruffness. He instructed Yeo Woon to rest for the day and study the note he had left behind until his return. Before leaving, he gave Jongmeng a light, careless punch on the shoulder, calling him his henchman and ordering him to take care of his new student. Jongmeng winced from the unexpected blow as Submeng left the room with that same crooked grin. Jongmeng rubbed his arm and muttered in disbelief, remarking how the Right Guardian seemed genuinely amused for once. He turned to Yeo Woon and asked if he was alright. Yeo Woon nodded weakly, his voice faint but steady. It truly felt as if a storm had passed through the room. Jongmeng smiled, half in relief and half in disbelief. He congratulated Yeo Woon for becoming the disciple of the Right Guardian, a man feared and respected across the entire demonic cult. Yeo Woon thanked him sincerely. Jongmeng then observed the boy's pale complexion, remarking on how his body had endured so much. Internal injuries, exhaustion, and now this sudden turn of events. He promised to fetch the acupuncture tools and asked Yeo Woon to rest until then. When he left, silence settled again. Yeo Woon sat still, his thoughts calm yet heavy. In this academy filled with enemies and unseen dangers, fate had handed him 2 allies, Nano and the Right Guardian. For the first time, the path before him no longer felt utterly alone. Inwardly, he whispered to the memory of those who had protected him, his mother and guard Jang. In this cruel world, he finally had someone standing by his side. Jongmeng returned with his instruments, neatly arranged in a tray. He announced that the preparations were complete and that they could begin the treatment. Yeo Woon hesitated for a moment before asking if his condition was truly that severe. Jongmeng's tone turned serious as he explained the situation. The internal injuries were extensive, and even under his care, it would take at least 11 to 15 days before Yeo Woon could participate in the academy's next tests. The words struck Yeo Woon like a blow. His eyes widened in alarm. Time. That was the one thing he couldn't afford to lose. Inside, his thoughts churned rapidly. If Nano began the self-recovery process, his body would heal almost instantly, but healing that fast would raise suspicion and expose what he carried within him. Yet, if he chose to undergo ordinary treatment, he would fall behind the other cadets, blind to what came after the first test. Jongmeng tried to reassure him with a faint smile, insisting that Yeo Woon shouldn't be too discouraged. If it were any ordinary doctor, recovery would take months. His own training under Baek-jong-woo would make the process far shorter. Yeo Woon still looked disheartened, his mind caught between concealment and progress. Jongmeng noticed his frustration and lowered his voice. With a quiet, knowing tone, he added that he would pretend not to know that Yeo Woon was learning martial arts under the Right Guardian. Grateful, Yeo Woon thanked him sincerely and promised that he would return the favor someday. Jongmeng waved the words aside with a faint chuckle, saying he expected nothing in return. Then, with his usual directness, he tore open Yeo Woon's clothes in one swift motion for the acupuncture session, only to freeze at what he saw. His eyes widened in disbelief. Though he knew the boy had never trained in martial arts, Yeo Woon's physique was far from weak. His muscles were lean and balanced, shaped with unnatural precision. Jongmeng studied him silently, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't the result of Naegong training, that much was certain. Perhaps, he thought, the boy had trained in Weigong, strengthening his body through sheer physical endurance. Without dwelling further, Jongmeng picked up the acupuncture needles and began the procedure. The first needle, he explained, would go directly into the center of the chest. But before the metal could pierce his skin, Nano's mechanical voice echoed sharply in Yeo Woon's mind. It had detected a threat and immediately activated the body's self-defense protocols. Yeo Woon's eyes widened. He quickly ordered Nano to stop. This wasn't an attack, it was treatment. He explained that the doctor's actions were deliberate and safe. At once, Nano acknowledged his command and deactivated the defense mode. It warned, however, that any action causing harm to his body without prior notice would be treated as hostile. Yeo Woon agreed, telling it not to react to anything he willingly accepted from this point onward. The needles began to slide into precise points along Yeo Woon's body, the chest, below the heart, and down the arm. As the treatment began, a wave of relief spread through Yeo Woon's abdomen. The sharp pain in his stomach began to fade. Nano quietly analyzed the procedure, retrieving internal data from its medical database. It informed him that the 6 acupuncture points being used were directly linked to accelerated regeneration in the stomach region. Yeo Woon listened to the explanation, quietly impressed. The information came to him more naturally this time, clear and easy to understand. Jong Meng watched him for a moment, then instructed him to rest while the acupuncture took effect. Yeo Woon gave a faint nod, closed his eyes, and let the calm settle in. Though Yeo Woon lay still on the bed with his eyes closed, sleep refused to come. His body remained unmoving, but his mind churned restlessly as Nano's constant explanations filled his thoughts. Every word, every mechanical update made it impossible to rest. He sighed inwardly, frustration flickering beneath his calm expression. Then a thought crossed his mind, one that could solve everything. If Nano could heal his internal injuries completely, this entire recovery process would be finished in moments. But healing too fast would only draw suspicion from the doctors and the academy staff. He needed to appear weak, yet still recover enough to train. After a moment's pause, he gave Nano his command. He asked if it could repair his injuries while still making it seem as though he were wounded. Nano responded immediately, its tone clinical and precise. Once the internal recovery was complete, it confirmed it could alter his pulse to imitate the rhythm of a patient still suffering from organ damage. A faint smirk tugged at Yeo Woon's lips. The plan was perfect. If he could deceive Dr. Jong Meng for even 2 weeks, he would have enough time to secretly train under the right guardian and begin learning Negong. He gave his order without hesitation. Heal him completely, but keep up the illusion of injury when the doctor checked on him. Nano acknowledged the command and activated the self-recovery mode. After Cheon Yeo Woon had been carried to the infirmary, the once vibrant ceremony at the demonic academy fell into uneasy silence. The field that had moments ago echoed with shouts of ambition was now filled with weary cadets sitting cross-legged across the vast ground, forced into meditation to recover from the damage caused by the first test. At the center of the field stood Ho Jin Chang, the upper senior martial artist of the academy. His voice rang clear as he stepped forward to deliver the report. He bowed toward the stage where the left guardian waited and announced the results with precision, including the 7th cadet Cheon Yeo Woon, who had been taken to the medical room. Only 415 had passed. Lee Hameng's sharp gaze scanned the rows of cadets. His tone was calm, but a trace of dissatisfaction lingered beneath it. 200 fewer had passed compared to the test 10 years ago. A steep decline. He remarked that Elder Hang's energy waves had been far too intense, though he knew well that no one would dare criticize the 5th Elder aloud. Still, he couldn't deny the truth. This year's test had pushed too far. The murmurs began to rise from behind. The failed students, bruised in both body and pride, erupted in protest. Their voices shook with anger as they demanded fairness, unwilling to accept that their failure had been sealed by a test they deemed unjust. The instructors, however, were merciless. Their expressions hardened as they stepped forward, eyes cold with authority. When the uproar refused to quiet, one of them barked out a single command that cut through the noise like a blade. All rebels were to be expelled. The order was carried out instantly. The rebellious cadets, shouting and struggling, were struck down and dragged off the field. Their cries faded into the distance as the academy's gates closed behind them. Ho Jin Chang watched the scene with quiet disapproval, shaking his head. Those who stood at the front now, the heirs and prodigies of the 6 clans, had already proven their superiority. The expelled ones, too blinded by their frustration, had thrown away even the chance to learn from defeat. Hameng's voice broke the silence again, colder this time. He admitted that were he in their place, he might have called it unfair as well. Yet fate did not favor the weak. It was because of Cadet 7, the one who had endured what none others could, that the 5th Elder's intensity had risen so dangerously. He paused before concluding flatly. Those without skill or fortune simply met the fate they deserved. Ho Jin Chang reported to the left guardian that among those who had survived the brutal first test, a number of cadets stood out as truly exceptional. Most of the survivors were still deep in meditation, tending to their internal injuries, yet the heirs of the 6 clans, along with 8 others from the upper families, had shown a level of strength that placed them far above the rest. Hameng's sharp eyes swept across the field, silently assessing them. To withstand Elder Hang's energy waves without collapse would normally require decades decades, even centuries of accumulated Naegong. Yet among the exhausted cadets, two remained steady. The Dark Clan's Cheon Moo and the Blade Clan's Cheon Yu. Their endurance revealed frightening potential, and Hameng found himself quietly entertained by the thought of the rivalry that would soon unfold between the two clans. Once his assessment was complete, Hameng addressed the field with commanding authority. The surviving cadets were formally acknowledged as members of the Demonic Academy and were to receive bronze medals, the mark of the Academy's lowest rank. For the next 4 years, they would train, compete, and rise in power through their own strength alone. He imposed the Academy's first rule with absolute finality. No cadet was permitted to speak ordinary affirmations. Within these grounds, obedience had only one word, motto. That single answer was the embodiment of discipline and allegiance. A surge of unity followed as every cadet responded in one voice, the echo rolling through the field like thunder. Hameng's expression softened slightly, satisfied by the sound of perfect order. With ceremony concluded, he ordered the formation of groups. Instructors spread across the grounds, organizing the students according to their lineage, potential, and performance in the test. Master Chang's commanding voice cut through the noise of the field, ordering the cadets to attention. In a swift and synchronized motion, every student straightened and echoed motto in response. Hameng stepped forward. His tone was cold and deliberate as he outlined the next phase of their trials. The second test, he declared, would determine who among them was worthy of advancing to the rank of mid-level warrior. Every cadet would face this stage together, and it would demand not only strength but mastery of tactics and battlefield strategy. He gave them their time frame, 20 days. The reaction rippled through the crowd in silent disbelief. The pressure was suffocating. 3 weeks to prepare for a test that could decide their future within the academy felt impossibly short, yet Hameng's gaze offered no sympathy. Only 10 groups, he continued, would advance. Cooperation was mandatory. The cadets would have to move as one, and any internal rivalry would lead to collective failure. Hameng dismissed the cadets to their dormitories, instructing them to rest before their next day of training. The instructors standing before them, he warned, would begin teaching tactics and combat techniques, though their reputation for cruelty was already well known after their brutal handling of the rebellious cadets earlier that day. As the crowd dispersed, a quiet exchange took place at the edge of the field. Group instructor Im Pyong noticed a lone figure still standing. It was Cheon Moo Kum, his posture calm but intent. When questioned, the young man stated that he had a matter to discuss. Im Pyong's expression tightened slightly. Questions about training were not permitted, yet Moo Kum's tone carried quiet confidence. He was already certain of his role. He expected to be named the leader of Group 8. The instructor's thoughts darkened. The official selection of team leaders had not yet taken place, but as always, the 6 clans had little interest in following rules meant for everyone else. Cheon Moo Kum reported that Cadet 7, the boy assigned to his group, was still confined to the infirmary. His tone carried faint irritation as he feigned concern for the team's performance. A missing member during a group test, he reasoned, could endanger everyone's chances of passing. He insisted that the absent cadet be informed of everything discussed during the ceremony. Im Pyong regarded him with disinterest, his brief responses sharp and emotionless. His indifference only deepened Moo Kum's frustration, though the young heir masked it behind his calm expression. Inside, a cruel satisfaction stirred. The situation amused him. The low-born bastard had been placed in his group by chance, and fate had already begun to turn against him. Moo Kum silently decided that Cheon Yeo Woon's misfortune would end here. Im Pyong, however, reminded him that the main building was strictly off limits to cadets, except under rare circumstances. There was no reason for anyone to visit the infirmary without official permission. Later that evening, as the academy grew quieter, Im Pyong visited the medical wing himself to confirm the state of the injured cadet. When the doctor explained that Yeo Woon's internal injuries would require at least 2 full weeks of recovery, the instructor's eyes widened slightly in disbelief. 2 weeks, an eternity within the academy's unforgiving schedule. Dr. Jongmeng elaborated, his tone steady. The internal damage was extensive, and without Naegong, recovery would be painfully slow. There was no medicine or treatment that could accelerate it. Im Pyong's expression darkened. The second test was only 3 weeks away. A 2-week hospitalization would cripple the group's chances entirely. He remained silent for a long moment, his thoughts clouded with irritation. He didn't want his team's elimination to be tied to one boy's weakness, but the rules left him no choice. He requested to meet the cadet, explaining that there were important matters to discuss. Yongmeng hesitated, glancing toward the still figure lying motionless beneath the sheets. With a quiet sigh, the doctor explained that Yeo Woon was asleep and waking him might worsen his condition. Im Pyong nodded curtly and declined. He would return the following day instead. Turning away, he left without another word, his expression cold and dismissive. As he stepped into the corridor, his thoughts hardened. The boy had barely scraped through the first test, surviving only by sheer luck. That luck, he decided, had now run its course. Before dawn the next morning, long before the hall walls stirred with life, a shadow entered the infirmary. The scent of strong liquor filled the air as Sub-meng, the right guardian, appeared beside Yeo Woon's bed. He addressed the boy with rough amusement, calling him apprentice, his tone a strange mix of pride and mischief. The sharp stench of alcohol hit Yeo Woon as he opened his eyes in surprise. Still weakened from the previous day, he sat up quickly and greeted his teacher with a respectful bow. Sub-meng nodded, seemingly pleased by the gesture, before cutting straight to the point. He asked whether Yeo Woon had completed the task assigned to him, the memorization of the breath of Naegang. Though the command had been given only the day before, Yeo Woon affirmed that he had memorized everything. Inwardly, he was thankful for Nano's earlier intervention. His mind was clear, his body stable, and his memory flawless. Sub-meng studied him for a long moment, slightly taken aback. He had only given the order to provoke effort, not expecting the injured boy to actually accomplish it. A small grin curved his lips as he spoke in approval, his tone laced with rare satisfaction. Yeo Woon thanked his teacher respectfully, though confusion lingered in his tone. He couldn't help but point out that it was still far too early for a lesson. Sub-meng asked whether the boy was tired already. Yeo Woon quickly denied it, but the exchange was short-lived. The crazy blade was not one for idle talk. Without wasting time, Sub-meng revealed that their training window was limited. He would only be able to instruct Yeo Woon for 2 weeks, the duration of his stay in the infirmary. Once the boy was transferred to the dormitories, all contact would have to cease. It was a rule of the academy, one that even a guardian could not risk breaking openly. Yeo Woon nodded in understanding. He hadn't considered how brief their time together would be. Sub-meng, however, continued with casual ease, explaining that his duties as one of the main instructors during the day made these early morning sessions the only viable option. Any later, and others would begin to grow suspicious. Yeo Woon silently acknowledged the man's carefulness. In a place like the demonic academy, and where outside instruction was strictly forbidden, Sub-meng's willingness to teach him despite the risks was no small gesture. Gratitude stirred in his chest, and he thanked his teacher sincerely for the consideration. Sub-meng merely waved it off, his tone turning brisk again. There was no time to waste, he said. The lessons had to begin immediately. Yeo Woon's eyes widened in surprise, but before he could protest, Sub-meng's voice sharpened with authority. The boy obeyed at once, turning and sitting on his knees on the cold floor as ordered. Sub-meng settled behind Yeo Woon and placed his palm firmly against the boy's back. The sudden contact made Yeo Woon tense, confusion flickering across his face as he asked what his teacher intended to do. Sub-meng's reply came in his usual blunt tone. There was no time for slow progress. He would force the flow of energy directly into Yeo Woon's body. Before Yeo Woon could question further, Sub-meng explained that the technique was not his own, but one created by Yeo Woon's great-grandfather, with a method refined over generations to bypass the ordinary path of cultivation. There was no need to sense or guide chi. The teacher would take control of everything. A faint chuckle escaped the crazy blade as he told the boy not to scream, but his words barely registered before a surge of power tore through Yeo Woon's body. The rush of internal energy struck like fire beneath his skin, racing through every vein and nerve. The sudden pain made him clench his jaw, his breath sharp and ragged. The crazy blade's voice cut through his agony, low and threatening. He warned Yeo Woon to stay silent. A single shout would bring the guards, and their secret training would be exposed. Inside Yeo Woon's mind, Nano began to react instantly. It detected the influx of intangible energy flooding his bloodstream, classifying it as chi, the life force of this world. Data analysis commenced in real time, tracing the energy's pattern and its influence on his internal structure. Yeo Woon endured the onslaught, every muscle in his body trembling. He could feel the internal energy forcing open the narrow channels of his meridians. The pain was unbearable. Behind him, Sub-meng observed the process closely. Surprise flickered across his expression. The boy's energy flow was clear, his veins free of obstruction, his muscles already adapted as if tempered by years of training. It defied logic. The crazy blade chuckled under his breath, half in disbelief. He wondered if the Lord himself had secretly nurtured this child, the one born of Lady Hua. Whatever the truth, it no longer mattered. A grin spread across his face as he withdrew his hand slightly, his tone carrying a rare note of satisfaction. The process was smoother than expected. With a body like this, he thought 7 days would be enough. The lingering hum of internal energy fading between them. His breathing was uneven, sweat gathering across his brow from the immense strain of channeling such dense power. Wiping it away, he looked at Yeo Woon with a faint grin and asked if he had memorized the flow. Yeo Woon, still gasping for air, managed a nod. His entire body trembled from the ordeal, but his mind had already mapped the energy's path. Every circuit and pulse etched into memory. Sub-meng regarded him with faint approval. The first trial was always brutal, he explained, but it was the only way for someone without Naegang to awaken the dormant energy within. 7 days. That was the goal. In that time, Yeo Woon needed to gather enough Naegang to stand as a true martial practitioner. Yeo Woon steadied his breath, glancing at the weary form of his teacher. Even the crazy blade looked drained. His teacher had poured a great deal of energy into this lesson. The least he could do was prove worthy of it. He lowered his head deeply, his voice firm firm with resolve. He would succeed, no matter the pain or difficulty. A rough laugh escaped Sub-Meng, amused and faintly proud. The boy's words carried spirit at least. With that, he declared the training complete for the day. He reminded Yeo Woon not to forget the breathing method, to engrave the pattern and rhythm into his body until it became instinct. Then, turning toward the door, the crazy blade gave a final nod before leaving the room. Yeo Woon straightened, the faint ache still rippling beneath his skin. The cold focus in his eyes sharpened as he looked ahead. He would build his Naegong in 7 days, not because it was easy, but because he must. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.